leaders, M.V. Lakshmi from JNU, Ajie George from Stella College, and Shwetanshu, Bhushan. No, she's fellow from this Nehru Memorial Library. I have to give the short bio notes. They are saying only one line. Anyway, Dr. M.V. Lakshmi, she works as an assistant professor at the Center of Japanese Studies, School of Language, Literature and Culture Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru, New Delhi. Her research interests include modern Japanese literature on authors such as Endo Suchaku, Mishima Yokuo, and Akutagawa Ryunosuke. Her doctoral thesis focuses on studying images of India in major works of the modern Japanese fiction. She is also interested in Japanese travel writing on India. Ajie George, she is an associate professor at Stella College, Chennai. Her area of interest include American literature, travel writing, and post-colonial literature. Her doctoral research was on the writings of William Dalrymple, especially the historical, cultural, and spiritual resonances in his work. She is currently researching on travel writing in India, especially those by the Indian diaspora. And Shwetanshu Bhushan teaches history at Lady Sri Ram College, University of Delhi, and has the teaching experience of 18 years. She completed her master's, MPhil, PhD from JNU. Her research specializes in gender identities in Indian context. She has held various administrative positions in her college during her career. Her recent published book is, she is a co-author, you said? Co-author Beyond the Woman Question, 2018. She has delivered lectures, presented papers in many international and national conferences and seminars. She is interested in issues of gender and community identities in social history. At present, she is the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library Fellow and working on the gender in the contemporary society of Rajasthan. So we go by the as scheduled. So the first paper will be presented by M.V. Lakshmi.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present a paper. So I'll be talking about India in fiction and travel accounts of modern Japan, while taking the example of some works which I have called representative. So the genre of travel writing in Japan has been integral to Japanese literature, and this is not just in the modern times. It's known by the word Kiko Bungaku. Kiko Bungaku means travel literature, and this has included Nikki Bungaku. Nikki Bungaku is what we know as diary writing, and also travel accounts. So the trend has existed for a long time, and I just wanted to take the name of a few works which are often mentioned in this genre. The first is, of course, there's one called Tosa Nikki by Kino Tsurayuki. Then there is where a very famed poet called Kino Tsurayuki writes about his journey from this place called Tosa to Shikoku to Kyoto. And then there is a very famous one written by Matsuo Basho, who is known as representative of haiku in Japan, and he has written what is known as Oku no Hosomichi. Of course, these are not the only ones which were written. There were many more which I have actually cut out from the presentation today, but there have been travel accounts earlier than these, such as what is known as Manyoshu Manyoshu is one of the earliest writings in Japan. It's a collection of verse and prose, and it was written in the 8th century. And besides this, slowly, if I skip, just keeping in time, the time in mind, and we come to the modern period, which is what I'm going to talk about, then again there have been a huge number of travelogues and written about India. And in this, there have been, we can subclassify them into further categories. Like one could be Ryokooki. Ryokooki means travelogue. Then there are what are known as Temagata. Temagata means like if you come to India and then you write about the cuisine here, then Tema means theme. Then there could be another person who came to India and wrote about some other aspect of it. So Temagata is theme-wise, accounts of travel. So this has been the general trend, and besides this, of course, there have been guidebooks and stuff like that. Some more have, if I could mention, I've not put it on the slide either, are Indo Nikki, Ushito Kompyuta no Kunikara, which means a diary on Japan, a country of cows and computers. So this is written by somebody called Furuta Eiji in the year 2000. This is very, very recent, of course. And then there have been accounts which have been accompanied by sketches, for instance. And there is this person called Seno Kappa. Seno Kappa has written accounts about not just India, but he has traveled to various countries in the world, and where he has written an account and then also sketched. And most of his accounts he has sketched from the point of, as if from the bird's point of view, and so it's like looking at the whole place from the top. So if he looks at Taj Mahal, it's right from the top, and things like that. So there has been a variety, but I will not be covering all the works in detail. So I have chosen 3 works, and there are more. If I were to mention, for example, there is Morio Gai, he's a very big name when it comes to modern Japanese literature, and he has written about Ashoka. Then there are works such as Indo-Horo, or Reflections on India, or Exploring India, by Fujiwara Shinya, which I have put here. And the one travelogue which I am taking is Hotta Yoshie's Indo de Kangaeta Koto, which may be loosely translated as Thoughts in India. But if I were to talk about the focus of this paper, then it's not just the genre of travel writing. In fact, in this paper, I would like to take up 2 major authors of modern Japanese literature, in which travel to India is an integral part of the very plot. And the 2 authors I have taken up are Mishima Yukio and his work Hojo no Umi, and Endo Shusaku and his work Fukaikawa. And Mishima Yukio's Hojo no Umi has been translated into English as Sea of Fertility. And in Endo Shusaku's work Fukaikawa, there has again an English translation that's been done, and it is called The Deep River. Fukai is deep and Kawa is a river. Then the third one, the travelogue that I mentioned, is Hotta Yoshie's Indo de Kangaeta Koto. So this is Thoughts in India. So that is purely you can say more a travelogue than the other 2. So I'm exploring the theme of travel across these 3 works, across 2 genres. Now, why have I picked these 3 works? I would like to just say that the reason is that the 3 are interconnected, and the interconnectedness is because of how one influenced the other. So, and I'll come to this towards the end of the paper also, that the way that the writers of the fiction have portrayed India has been influenced, like Mishima has been influenced by reading of Indo de Kangaeta Koto, who in turn has influenced Endo Shusaku, who read both Mishima and Hotta Yoshie before he wrote his work. So that's why I'm taking up all three of them together and seeing how they have portrayed India together. So first I'll start with the fiction. So India is portrayed by Mishima. And I have so this work, Hojo no Mi, is a rather long work. It consists of 4 novels. It's a tetralogy. And the 4 parts are known as Haru no Yuki, Spring Snow, Homba, Akatsuki no Tera, and Tennin Gusui. So out of the 4 parts, the third part, which is known as Akatsuki no Tera, it can be translated as Temple of Dawn, is this Temple of Dawn is the work where India finds mention. And so it's important because in this work, in a way, Mishima has given us the images with which future writers of Japan also work with when they talk about India. And so what are the places that the character Honda, who is the protagonist of the novel, and he is the one who lives through all the 4 parts of the novel and visits India also. So I'll just talk about what brings Honda, the character in Mishima's work, to India. So Honda undertakes his journey to India when Itsui Products, the company for which he had worked in, gives him a pleasure trip to India as a token of gratitude. So that's how the chance to come to India is brought about in the novel. And the places that he visits are Banaras on the Ganges, then Ajanta caves, and then I have mentioned a few other. There's Kolkata and Ajanta Ellora, and these are the places from which Mishima Yukio forms his image of India. And besides, and I'll talk about them a little bit, and besides going to these places and observing the things and the people, there is another part of the novel in which he doesn't really base his writing on anything observed, but things that he brings into the novel to discuss, such as concepts of transmigration, of alaya consciousness, of karma, of samsara. So he brings in these concepts while he is in India, and he says that in a way one can talk about these and justify how one can think about these concepts because one is in India. So I'll just take up these concepts as we go. So Honda reaches Calcutta in the end of October when the city is in the middle of Durga Puja. And Mishima describes how goddess Kali has many forms, one of them being Durga, and that she is worshipped especially in the states of Calcutta and Assam. Now Mishima Yukio himself had undertaken a journey to India before he wrote this. So while it is fictive, and he has actually changed the course of the journey, for Honda, the character, the way he moves around in India, the route is exactly the opposite of what Mishima took. But in reality, both have actually travelled within India. Then goddess Kali is described much in detail, and she is talked about as a very important goddess in the Hindu pantheon of gods. And in fact, if I'll read a paragraph from the translation of the work. The way Mishima describes her is, the goddess Kali, the most popular of the Hindu pantheon and especially venerated in Bengal and Assam, had innumerable names and avatars, as did her husband Shiva, the god of destruction. Durga is one of Kali's metamorphoses. And then he goes on that core of Kali is Shakti, the original sense of which is energy. This great mother goddess of earth imparts to all female deities throughout the world her sublimity as mother, her feminine voluptuousness, and so on and so forth. So his rather detailed description is interesting because when we talk about the next author, Endo Shusaku, he borrows very much from this description. So the place of worship, Kalighat, the worshippers, is something that Honda describes at length. And he is also very taken aback at the fact that at the sacrifice, the ritual sacrifice, which he describes in detail, and he describes very much about the bloodshed and about the sacrifice, and he says that while I was really taken aback by it, it was everybody else, all the worshippers, everybody going to the temple, seemed to think that it was a matter of fact thing, that it was supposed to happen anyway, and it's almost like Indians are above this, or Indians, for them it is such a normal thing to happen. And I'll try and quote here. So he describes how a young man skilled at beheading the offering of the goat goes about his job in a very skillful way with no emotion or remorse. And how the head rolls while the goat is still kicking its hind legs is all described in a matter-of-fact way. And Mishima is very, very much admiring the young man's skill at this sword. And then he goes on to say that holiness dripped in the most ordinary way, like perspiration, from the depths of his clear, deep eyes and from his large peasant-like hands. The festival goers, accustomed to the sight, did not even turn around. So it was as though it was nothing out of the ordinary for the people who had visited the place. The next destination that he goes to is Banaras. And in Banaras, it is described as a holy city of the Hindus, and Mishima describes it as the Jerusalem of the Hindus. And he says that it is a place where pilgrims from all over the country congregate, and it is also has been mentioned as the main portal to paradise in the work. And at the same time, it is a place where it's a city of extreme filth as well as of extreme holiness. So Banaras so if I were to quote from the book, it says that Banaras was a city of extreme filth as well as of extreme holiness. On both sides of the narrow, sunless alleys, stalls for fried food and cakes, astrologers, grains and flower vendors were all crowded together, and the area was filled with stench, dampness and disease. So Mishima at some point says that the way India is, in order to grasp it and to not let it affect you, you have to abandon what is reason or what is logic. And he says that when he talks about logic, he says the important thing was to discard it. The edge of the knife of reason, which he had regarded as his weapon since youth, had barely been preserved, considering the nicks already inflicted on it by each substantiation of transmigration. Actually, transmigration is a very integral theme in this book. So all the 4 novels, Honda is the witness to his very close friend being reborn, and Honda actually witnesses them, and he wants to believe that his friend who had died in the first novel is reborn. So in the first novel he's reborn, in the second one he's reborn as a princess, in the third one as something else, in the fourth one as somebody else. So that is, the transmigration is a theme that is all pervading through the whole novel. So at Banaras, at the cremation ghat of the Manikarnika Ghat, he says that the Manikarnika Ghat, Mishima Yukio, the author says, Manikarnika Ghat is where Honda witnesses ultimate purification. This is the ghat of cremation, the ghat of cremation, and here Mishima says, the author says that Honda experiences an unexplicable joy, which he describes as there was no sadness or remorse but happiness. In India, the source of everything that seemed heartless what was connected with a hidden, gigantic, awesome joy. And this is how he explains it, that even as you see the funeral pyre, you see bodies burning, it was something that was very difficult to explain for a normal Japanese person, but it wasn't even sadness. So that is how he describes the scene here. The third destination, which is a little different from the other two, is that of Ajanta and Ellora. And here, when the Honda, the character reaches, he says that finally I find some calm, some serenity, because Banaras had been a place where he had to almost, like he said, abandon reason, and it was something that was just too overwhelming for him to grasp. The place with relative calm and quiet is Ajanta and Ellora for the character Honda. And interestingly, I mean, there is a scene in the scene, or there is a paragraph, there is an excerpt from the novel, which I don't seem to have written here, but it is where he witnesses a waterfall, which he then equates with the waterfall where his friend said he would be born. So then there is this linking with the the theme of transmigration. So that is where it ends. But the choice of places, I mean, if I were to sum up the concrete images here, is interesting, and because while there is Calcutta, Banaras, which is also the, as he calls it, the Jerusalem of the Hindus, then there is also Ajanta Ellora, which is also associated with Buddhism, and this is where he also starts to write in the novel about the concepts of transmigration, rebirth, and alaya consciousness upon reaching the third destination. So that is where he tries to weave in the abstract concepts and try to associate it with the main theme of the novel. If I were to go on to the next work, which is Endo Shusaku Fukaikawa, translated as The Deep River, then the story of Fukaikawa actually revolves around a trip to India, which is undertaken by 5 Japanese people. So the travel to India part is right at the start of the novel. 5 Japanese tourists, and these are tourists, want to take a trip to India, and all of them don't know each other, but each of them decides to visit India so that they can find answers to some questions that they have. For instance, one of them, his wife dies, and her last words are that I'll be reborn somewhere, and he believes that somehow going to India will help him find her. Then for one more, he has lost a fellow soldier in war, and he feels that if he and during war he had to eat human meat in order to survive, and he is not able to overcome the guilt, and so he feels that if he goes to India and offers prayers, somehow he can get over that. There's one more, and so there are these 5 people with absolutely 5 different situations who decide to go to India on the same trip. So that's the general, the way the thing starts. And Fukaikawa in Japan also has been often researched as a Tabi no Monogatari. Monogatari is any kind of a story. Tabi is travel. Tabi no Monogatari is a story of travel or a novel of travel. Because even within, not just to India, but even after having gone to India, the fact that travel is so integral to the novel, and in fact even the last scene of the novel is such that the tourists are leaving by the bus and they're going somewhere. So there is no end as such. The travel is so integral to the whole novel. And interestingly, I mean, if you look at the images that Fukaikawa has of India, they are quite similar to what Mishima Yukio has portrayed. So while there is no Durga here, but there is Kali and there is Chamunda. And Chamunda is again the goddess, and here Chamunda is, the tour guide, there is this tour guide, a Japanese tour guide who takes around this group in India, and he takes them to these various places. But somehow, while the trip was originally made in a way to take these tourists to Buddhist sites in India, the author in a way steers the whole thing to Banaras. So it is in a way taking them to Banaras, to the Hindu site, the Hindu, site, yeah. And here I think it will be important to mention that Endo Shusaku is somebody who has, through most of his works, tried to grapple with this. He is a Christian. He is baptized as a Christian at a very young age, and he forever keeps saying that it is like wearing somebody else's clothes which don't fit me. And so through his various works he tries to see how he can adapt into the religion and how he can feel like a natural. And this is his last novel, where he sees possibly that just like Ganga, which takes in everybody who comes, and while there is filth, there is something holy about the place, and just about anybody can come there. So one of the main characters in the novel also finds his faith at Ganga. Whether it's Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism is not clearly defined here. So in fact, so much so that Endo Shusaku doesn't use the word God, but he says the onion. Because this man, Otsu, since he was a young man, was often made fun of by his college mates because he was a little reticent and he would have faith, and people would think it's very funny. And so his very good friend, who's another of the 5 tourists, happens to meet him in India and reminds him, what about the onion now? So without really referring to the Christ, since we know that this is an author who has actually played with the theme of Christianity through his works, he has, So he has brought us to India, and those Shusaku takes the story to India and to Banaras. So I will not read all the images, I have just listed up some of them. As far as concepts go, there is, Kyozon is coexistence. So coexistence of everybody in the sense people of all faiths, or even people who are rich, poor, diseased, not diseased. So everybody comes to the Ganges, and that is one thing that has been talked about. The third work which I have tried to talk about, and I'll have to keep it really brief, is Hotta Yoshie's Indo Dekhangai Takoto, which translates into Thoughts in India. So the very title of the work says Thoughts in India, and the travelogue is important because it, even though it was criticized as a very loose, imbalanced, a subjective piece of work which is not systematic at all, at the same time it is important because other authors actually followed his lead and started writing about India. So there were other works such as Indo Horo, which I had mentioned in the first slide, exploring India, which followed Hotta Yoshie. And then there was another person who wrote Washimo Indo Dekhangaeta, means I also thought in India, which is a reference to Hotta Yoshie, who says I thought in India. So there was another man who wrote I also thought in India. So taking him as the reference point, other people have actually talked about India, which is in a way a parody of Hotta's work though. So if I were to put down the main observations, and I've skipped reading this slide, please have a look, is that, so his observations are just listed up here. They are of varied nature. They're on people, on just about various aspects of life in India. And he's also well read, and he comes to India as a scholar. So he has read about Nehru and Asians and what he thinks about modernism in Japan and all that. So while he's looking at India, he's also reflecting back upon Japanese people and how they should be. So, and in fact, Hotta feels that Japanese people should visit India, especially those who want to think about things deeply, or about the core of things, or the basis of things. So if I were to quickly sum up my paper, then the commonalities as I found them across the 3 works, across the 2 genres, is that while the purposes of all 3 people were different, Like in fiction, it was by chance that the characters come, and in one planned visit to India, they were essentially tourists. For Hotta also, it was not really to travel and explore the country, but to attend a conference that he comes, and he stays on for 3 months, and then he decides to write about the place. In the fiction especially, I observed that people are depicted in plurals, as in no single person is given a name. In Mishima Yukio's work, not even one place where they interact with the locals is there. In the second work, there are instances where they interact, but no names are given. It's a taxi driver or a crowd of people, or crowd of people compared to flies. So things like that. But rarely, other than the mention of one person called Rajni, the person whom the husband believes his wife is reincarnated as, whom he never gets to meet, there is not even one single Indian person that the people interact with in the novels. In the travelogue, the interactions are relatively more, and based on which Hotta forms his impressions of Indian people. And in all three works, India seems to be a trigger for reflection and thought, as much as a place to observe or explore. But more than exploration, it looks like reaffirmation of existing ideas is what happens. And to skip to the last slide, so why I find it interesting to read these three works is that they seem to reiterate or repeat the images across them, thereby establishing a certain image of India from 1958 to 1993. There doesn't seem to be a very big change in what the authors choose to talk about. Religion and spirituality seem to be very integral to all the three works, more for the fiction, a little less for Hotta's travelogue. And in all three works, like I said, reflecting about how the Japanese people themselves are is very important. And I also felt that while Japan is an Asian country, but the way it views India is somewhat with the Oriental perspective. So I would put Japan as having an ambivalent stance, because while it is also being looked at by the Westerners as a country of the Orient, Japan herself is in turn looking at India as from an Oriental perspective. So that puts Japan at a very interesting place of how she herself looks at other Indian countries. And so the journey for all these people has been not just in literal terms, but one where it takes them to a place where they can actually ponder about things which are about philosophy, religion. So it is not just the real journey, but not just in literal terms, but in the figurative terms as well. Thank you.
We shall take up the questions later. Let the next paper reader make her presentation.
Good evening. Thank you, ma'am, for inviting me. So my paper will focus on The Age of Kali. It's a travel account by William Dalrymple. William Dalrymple is referred to as a travel writer and a historian, but I'm now wary of calling him a historian, because yesterday when I had a talk with some of the eminent historians here, they were quite critical about his knowledge of and his approach towards history. My paper looks at him as a travel writer. So, travel writing has received critical scrutiny after Edward Said's Orientalism. Since then, the significance of different kinds of travel narratives, individual modes of narration, and the agenda of travel writing have become subjects of academic interest. Duncan and Gregory, in Rites of Passage, credit travel writers of the latter half of the 20th century with reinventing the genre, giving it both a new popularity and a new critical respectability by raising pertinent questions about the politics of representation, the spaces of transculturation, and the ecological, economic, and cultural implications of globalizing projects of modernity. These texts are said to embody the versatility of the genre and to reveal the changing cultural desires and anxieties of both the travel writer and the reader of travel narratives. So this paper studies The Age of Kali, which was written based on the journeys of the author through the Indian subcontinent during the period 1989 to 1998. Published in 1998, it is one of William Dalrymple's well-known works. Now, I'm going to look at this text from three different angles. One is the form that he has adopted. Like Lakshmi said, most travel writing developed alongside the novel, and many features of the novel inform travel writing and vice versa. So the lengthy narrative, which was which was a novel, is reflected usually in most literary travel narratives. However, in Age of Kali, the author has adopted short narratives based on the different places he travels to, and most of them are not connected to each other. Secondly, I'm looking at William Dalrymple as a writer who is very conscious of the position that he is writing from. Whether he's an outsider or an insider, he is very aware of post-colonial theory and criticism, and therefore his writing is self-reflexive. He's constantly going back to the fact that it is he who is writing about all these places, and whether he is looking at them in an appropriate manner. And not very directly, but this paper, again, therefore questions William Dalrymple's position as a writer about India. Now, Graham Huggin, in his Interdisciplinary Measures, states that post-colonial criticism could now be recognized as, I quote, a synchronic survey of the differentiated experiences of global modernity and a diachronic index of the changing role of global capital in shaping responses to both the neo-colonial present and the imperial past, unquote. In the constantly changing political and social nature of the world today, travel writing can be seen as a prominent place for the mixture of personal reportage and socio-political analysis. Mobility offers contemporary writers the opportunity to escape conventional definitions of nationality and identity. It is possible today to belong to more than one nation, and this may involve traveling frequently to another country or even spending long durations of time in a country that is not traditionally or politically considered your own. In fact, there is a TED talk by Pico Iyer, another travel writer, called Where is Home, in which he talks about the identity of this modern travel writer who is transcultural in nature. Travel, cultural exchanges, and examination of history are markers of the contemporary person's globalized perception and his or her way of inhabiting the world. Now, despite the cosmopolitanism professed by contemporary travel writers, the genre is even today accused of continuing the imperialist agenda in diverse ways, primarily by critics such as Mary Louise Pratt, Graham Huggin, and Debbie Lyle. Lyle charges contemporary travel writers of not being emancipatory in their approach and of not dealing with intricate and ambiguous power relations and of returning to old ways of narration. While the argument held and holds true for a vast body of travel literature, there are a number of writers who, according to Robert Clark, I quote, deploy travel discourse in a manner that subverts both colonial claims to truth-making as well as the nexus between travel and dominance, unquote. William Dalrymple's identity as traveler/writer/historian is that of one who is not only multiply located but also multidirectional, a position that allows him to engage in, I quote, a progressive politics of mobility whereby the traveler or writer is self-reflexive about his participation in the genre and responds through a series of experimentations in form and style, unquote. His position as a travel writer or historian, serious writer or popular writer is much debated, and it refuses to be slotted easily. Now I go on to another part of my paper where I talk about his style of writing. Literary journalism, also called narrative journalism or creative nonfiction, gained popularity in the 20th century. It is recognized as a type of writing that combines the information-gathering methods of journalistic reporting with the narrative techniques of realistic fiction by means of a process called saturation reporting. It ensured that the emphasis was put on ways of observing the external world and systematically recording and analyzing such observations. William Dalrymple's Dalrymple merges the roles of travel writer and literary journalist in the age of Kali, offering his readers sensitive accounts which often counter the popular narratives about India that dominate the Western imagination. The age of Kali records how religion and culture are so intricately bound in South Asia that the religious community and the cultural community are often considered homologous. Caste, another marker of cultural identity, and its implications are also studied. The narrative reveals how the implications of caste are stronger and more evident in rural areas than the urban, and says that this could be attributed to economic development and its attendant factors like education, migration, and common living spaces that have acted as leveling agents in urban areas. The Age of Kali has 6 sections, each dealing with a specific geographical location in the countries of India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and the Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean. And all of these obviously are situated in the Indian subcontinent. It could be called an eclectic collection of writings that deal with various issues, some of which are endemic to specific regions, and others that are the result of socio-political changes, especially the liberalization of trade. The effects of all of these on women, too, become the focus of some narratives. The survival and at times the revival of religion, myth, and beliefs, and the lingering effects of colonial culture become the objects of study in some other pieces. It is the cultural heterogeneity of the region that the author draws attention to, especially at a time when some niche practices and customs seem to be facing a threat from the leveling forces of urbanization and modernization. One of the predominant threads that runs through the narratives that are set in northern India is that of caste and its close affinity to politics. The narrative begins with 3 newspaper reports based on violent incidents that occurred in Bihar. However, the author is intrigued that most people he talks to dismiss them as everyday incidents. In Rajasthan, a victim of caste violence explains to the author that if caste was restrictive, it was reassuring too. It was a protection against anarchy. A similar response is recorded when the author follows the story of Devi, a village-level social worker in Rajasthan who was raped for trying to change and therefore challenged the age-old social practice of child marriage. In the case of Bhavri and women like her, the narrative reveals that the forces of caste, gender, literacy, and economics are all lined up against them. Sociologist Devyani Ganguly's study of the caste system in India questions the dominant narrative of normative modernity, which theorizes caste as, I quote, a social structure and a way of living that is not in tune with a kind of secular, progressive, rational way of being, which brands caste practices as backward and oppressive. She proposes a non-pedagogical sensibility that will recognize them as not being opposed to modernization, but as practices that are entwined with numerous ways of dwelling and belonging in Indian modernity. Dalrymple's narratives use a journalistic approach to interrogate caste-based conflict. The first-hand accounts personalize the news reports, highlighting the overt and sometimes covert ways in which the complex mechanisms of caste, religion, politics, and gender fuel these incidents. In 1987, Rajasthan gained worldwide attention after a young widow, Roop Kanwar, committed sati, a practice banned by the British in 1829. After detailed sketches of the day's events from different perspectives, Dalrymple comments on the irreconcilable nature of the debate between the traditional religious and cultural significance of the practice and the modern, secular, educated incredulity that condemns it. Another account that focuses on women is set in Vrindavan, when Dalrymple meets a widow who, along with her 95-year-old mother, also a widow, lived a life of abject poverty and humiliation. He notes that these women have no sense of security, no access to health care, and no skills which could help them earn money. In fact, he narrates an incident where he finds out that some of the people who take care of the ashrams in which these women live actually rent the younger women out as prostitutes to the rich landowners in the area. Dalrymple contrasts these accounts of aggressive power politics and those of gender violence with the almost whimsical accounts of Lucknow and Hyderabad. The complete degeneration of the richest and most decadent of Indian cities, Lucknow, is captured through the reminiscences of some of its oldest residents. In southern India, the past glory of Hyderabad is recounted by the descendant of the Prime Minister of the Nizam's court. The 1948 invasion of Hyderabad by the Indian Army is an example of the author using Petit Récit to present an alternate version of history. Nationalist history terms the invasion as police action, but the resident recalls that it was an unequal fight between the ill-equipped Hyderabad state and the mighty Indian Army. European colonialism and its cultural fallouts are the focus when Dalrymple studies the remnants of colonial Britain in Lucknow, of Portugal in Goa, and of France in the Reunion Islands. In his account, titled East of Eton, he presents the La Martiniere School in Lucknow, which was modelled on the public schools in England. It is depicted as having resisted change even after independence, continuing to exist as an archipelago of Englishness. The influence of colonization and the subsequent liberation of Goa by independent India are seen from the perspective of Donna Georgina, a resident. Dalrymple observes that the long Portuguese rule of 415 years over Goa had forged unique bonds between the colonizers and the colonized. The section on the French colony of Reunion in the Indian Ocean, titled The Sorcerer's Grave, records French colonial impact. The extreme isolation of the island has ensured the survival of unique folklore, religious practices, and languages. Both the sections on Goa and that on Reunion read like conventional travel pieces. They contain evocative descriptions of the environment and a smattering of anecdotal history that provide a background to the unique cultures. These narratives exemplify the need to study and understand European colonization as a multifarious historical phenomenon whose impact on peoples and cultures cannot be generalized. In the narratives that focus on the cities of Bombay and Bangalore, Dalrymple studies the effects of rapid modernization on urban Indians. The hyper-development of Bangalore has led to a fear, especially among the urban, economically weaker classes, that presents itself as xenophobia and nationalism. The opening up of the economy in the 1990s introduced a kind of capitalism that India was unfamiliar with until then. However, it seems to have done little to check the class-based, caste-based, region-based, and rural-urban-based social inequalities. Dalrymple argues that xenophobia and nationalism were just fronts behind which lay a very reasonable fear of progress, a genuine disorientation in the face of massive change. More perspectives on the impact of economic liberalization are offered in the narrative titled Two Bombay Portraits, in which Dalrymple's meetings with Baba Sehgal, whom he calls the world's first Hindi rap megastar, and Shobha Dey, whom he refers to as the Jackie Collins of India, are related. Both Sehgal and Dey are seen as pioneers who offered indigenous content in imported forms to a large body of consumers who had longed for them for a long time. The sections on Madurai and Kerala, both in southern India, deal with religion, ritual, and faith in relation to two principal temples. These read as precursors to his next book, that is 9 Lives, because they dwell on regionalized worship practices and also, again, draw attention to the prominent place held by religion and ritual in the lives of the average Indian. In his account on Madurai, titled At the Court of the Fish-Eyed Goddess, Dalrymple uses the conventional tropes of travel writing in his description of the architectural beauty of the famous Meenakshi temple. Another temple in which the goddess is the principal deity is the Chotanikara Devi temple in Kerala, and at which Dalrymple witnesses the exorcism of possessed women. His account of this is very interesting because he seems to be overwhelmed by the noise and all the rituals taking place, and he notices little boys and girls standing there rather bored by the whole spectacle. In both these accounts, it is interesting to note that the author introduces the readers to the personal perspectives of two specific devotees, both of them men, and he draws attention to the fact that both these men are highly educated, held government jobs, and how they do not see any disconnect between rational modern education and personal religion. Civil war and its consequences become the subject of the piece on Sri Lanka. Dalrymple traveled to the island in the role of a journalist commissioned by the BBC in 1990 when the struggle for the Tamiram was at its peak. He displays here the doggedness, endurance, and skill of a war correspondent who gathers information in risk-prone areas. Though he expresses great admiration for the fearlessness, discipline, tenacity, and zeal displayed by the young female and male recruits, he also expresses concern for the exploitation of children, teenagers who handled automatic weapons nonchalantly and who spoke of massacres with little emotion. The last few sections in the Age of Kali focus on Pakistan, with special attention paid to two famous Pakistanis, Benazir Bhutto and Imran Khan. Dalrymple's journeys through the country reveal that feudalism, ethnic differences, and political nepotism continue to determine the Pakistani way of life. He observes that Pakistani politics differs from the Indian in that the huge and highly educated middle class, which was instrumental in the fight for independence in India, is still, to a remarkable extent, excluded from the political process in Pakistan. Moving to the frontiers of Pakistan, Dalrymple records the violence, which was a way of life, an obsession, and a philosophy in that region. In one of the most evocative sections in the book, the author draws parallels between the harsh, bleak landscape and its cold and proud inhabitants, the Pathans. In Lahore, Dalrymple's visit to the city's railway station provides him with the opportunity to elaborate on the significant role played by the railways during the 19th and 20th centuries. He makes the claim that it was the railways that made the Indians aware of the fact that the country was a single geographical unit that, I quote, made India a nation, unquote. The author meets with various members of the Bhutto family, thus revealing the complex nature of politics, especially that of dynastic power in the subcontinent. The narrative also records the struggles of newly democratic governments that find it difficult to let go of traditional notions of leadership and power. The Age of Kali travels all over the subcontinent, even as it calls attention to cultural, religious, political, and historical nuances of specific regions. In doing so, it counters Lyle's accusation of escapes into imagined pasts and negotiates established tropes of the genre, echoing Carl Thompson's sentiment that travel writing has the potential to, I quote, create images of other cultures which are complex, respectful, and where appropriate, sympathetic, while also remaining mindful of the relationships of knowledge and power that operate in the modern world, unquote. I'm coming to the conclusion. One of the risks that political travel writing and theory faces is that these discourses still emanate from centers of power. In Pratt's recent afterword to the Cambridge Companion to Postcolonial Travel Writing, she argues that postcolonial scholarly and aesthetic inquiry has focused primarily on European colonialism, and this, she claims, was achieved at the cost of a series of exclusions. Critics of the genre believe that there is an urgent need to see the world through other languages and cultures, to use non-Western paradigms of analysis, and for a recalibration of existing precepts. Contemporary travel writing has consciously attempted to move away from exoticism and the dialectics of Western dominance towards an ethical engagement with contemporary concerns, thus affording the genre some redemption from its colonial moorings. Thank you.
Respected Chair, my fellow speakers, and the august audience. The topic of my paper is Travel as an Indicator of Change, Exploring Female Travelers in Rajasthan. The origin of the word travel is from French word travail, which means to toil, labor. The English dictionary simply defines travel as to go on a journey, so it involves spatial movement. But what about women who is tied up from everywhere? Is she allowed to travel freely? I got an echoing answer, or rather I say reflection, from one of my respondents who narrated to me as follows. औरत 5 तत्वों से बंधी हुई है, आंखों से पर्दे से, मुंह से बोल से, हाथों से देने से, पैरों से बंधने से और कानों से सुनने से. I asked her categorically the meaning of this stanza of hers. She explained that women are covered from their eyes as she should not see the outer world and must be veiled. From her mouth, she is never allowed to speak freely since her childhood. Her hands are tied as she is not financially independent and cannot give anything on her own to anybody she wants. She is bound by her feet as her movement is restricted. And the last, her ears are not allowed to listen anything that is related to the exposure and learning of the outside world. The idea of travel fascinates human mind and imagination. I did not want to write the graphic description represented by female travelers and tourists who visit Rajasthan for its scenic beauty, heritage, luxury, and monuments. These women may be visiting more for leisure and recreation. However, my effort is to bring into mainstream one of the weakest sections of the society, and that is rural women and their purpose of travel. Here, I would like to bring some observations from the relevant secondary sources on travel. James Buzzard has convincingly distinguished a tourist and traveler in his work, The Beaten Track. He says, tourism and tourists were words and concepts circulated majorly for commercial purposes. A tourist is a superficial traveler whose travel plans are managed by the tourism mechanism and tourism industry. The destinations are pre-arranged and an encounter with an alien culture is masked by orchestrated meeting. The greatest challenge for travel writing in India, according to Shobhana Bhattacharjee in her book Travel Writing in India, is consolidation of the journey. It is not just the account of explorations or expeditions, but the stories of people who have migrated as labor force, stories of pilgrims, which can be got in abundance, and the tales of soldiers, bureaucrats, etc., who get an opportunity to go to the different places are not accounted at all. The relationship between self and the world is an integral part of travel writing. Carl Thompson, in his monograph Travel Writing, says that the reader of a good travel book is entitled not only to an exterior voyage, to descriptions of scenery and so forth, but also to an interior, a sentimental or temperamental voyage, which takes place side by side with the outer one. The journey inwards then appears as crucial as or more crucial than the journey outwards. An endeavor to understand how the dynamics of the two aspects operate, and that too at the Indian rural women's mind, lends itself to a fascinating study and an area to explore. Going by the French theorist Michel de Certeau's notion, every story is a travel story. It is a challenging task to circumscribe the scope of travel writing. It becomes clear that the mere physical or geographical explorations and their accounts do not constitute travel writing, but a personal journey through different situations and through different cultures are also as important. Hence, travel writing can be perceived as that which is twofold in nature. One, the physical journey, and the other, an accompanying inner journey. Travel writing, therefore, can be regarded as an exercise in promoting the self. Debbie Lisle, in her book titled The Global Politics of Contemporary Travel Writing, supports the heterogeneity of the journal, wherein there is no place for any blanket comments. Samuel John Thompson, way back in 1913, in his book, aptly says, in his book The Silent India, that there are indeed two Indias. The India of the large towns, from which the casual visitor draws his impressions, and which, with considerable clamour, voices the aspirations of perhaps a tenth of the total population of the country, and the India, the real India, of the silent millions who lead a simple rural life, contented with thoughts and occupations of their forefathers inherited from the distant past. When reviewing the rural areas, I observed women play a significant role in the domestic and socio-economic life of the society. There is no doubt in saying that this holistic national development is only possible. In fact, it is not possible without developing this segment of the society. The earlier trend and the series of work done deals with issues related to the feminism, ethics of feminism, to sexuality, marriage, motherhood, family, patriarchy, kinship, etc. There's a need to give primacy to women to share their own stories and experiences. The purpose of my study suggests that a lot needs to change to make women truly empowered. If women empowerment is to be pursued as a serious objective, greater emphasis needs to be placed on creating awareness and attitudinal change to achieve a larger and more lasting empowerment. I once again thank this conference for allowing me to express their travel stories. The present work discusses the importance of travel in the context of girls and women of the state of Rajasthan, with the case studies picked up belonging to the various aspects and make an effort to create an ecosystem which is much needed to promote the girl child and in general the perspectives for women. It has been often observed that till date the laws of Manu is applicable generally, if not mostly, which says, in childhood a woman must be subject to her father, in youth to her husband, and when her lord is dead, to her sons. However, the stories that I put forward before all of you are real stories of those women who have challenged the hierarchical norms of the society and travelled widely for their upliftment. The case studies for the present work are chosen from various sections and communities in Rajasthan, although there are a number of other interesting stories. The first and foremost thing that I find particularly striking and inspiring is the connection the organization of gender has with the concerns of prestige in a society, especially so in a hierarchical society. I stress the same because in the functional society like us, where population-wise youth are in majority and want to participate for the change, nothing would be better than the attitudinal change towards women. The likelihood of this change would lead us to the favorable social change where women would be accepted and respected equally. To combat the deep-rooted social issues, one needs to adopt multidisciplinary approach to reach to the village and to the grassroots level. My paper encapsulates these women who are changing and carving out spaces for themselves in the larger public and private domain of their lives by themselves. The study done in these villages, as represented in this work, is of qualitative in nature. For the collection of the data, interviews of women from diverse background had been undertaken. The respondents were chosen randomly from the villages and semi-urban areas. The study includes interviews of all aged women. The research is conducted examining and investigating women's experiences and motives for travel. In this scenario, I am attempting to talk about the village women and how travel has changed them, and in larger context, how travel is an indicator of change for the rural Indiana. Rajasthan rural women provide the main labor force on the farms and construction work since time immemorial. Economic self-sufficiency of rural women will not only eradicate the poverty in rural areas, but also bring the desired social change. It will provide them the support and platform to several initiatives needed to be undertaken. The division of labor in family household and men reporting participation in childcare would reflect the actual representation of women as providers and enhanced status. I would like to state that doing things in a non-conventional way would only posit the change and will diminish the gender difference. This can facilitate the systemic transformation. The case study is an invaluable way of offering original, rich, and detailed illustration and exemplification. These case studies would illuminate the potential roadblocks to undoing gender through attitudinal and behavioral change. Whatever till date I have observed is as a silent observer if possible and not participated. During each discussion sessions, I took extended pen and paper notes on the topic of the discussion, testimonies from the participants' own lives. All of them are thick with descriptions of places and people with their specific characteristics and patterns of life and behavior. When I say women, she's a daughter, she's a wife, mother, she's sister, and she's the nucleus of the family. She's the centripetal force. Indeed, these native women could never pen down their experiences as they are involved in their quotidian practices, daily activities, without realizing their self-potential and their self-reliance. Here is an attempt to empower such ordinary women. Such studies done would not only enhance the status of rural women, but also help to develop awareness and economic independence personal and social capabilities among countryside women. Keeping in mind the sensitivity of this issue, that is their personal lives and relation, the names have been changed. Interviews were conducted in very informal ways so as to go deeper in study. Our respondents here are rural and semi-urban women from the age group 18 to 40 years who have travelled within and outside Rajasthan for various purposes, addressed to their economic upliftment and education. It is to be pointed out that they earnestly wish to contribute to advancement of women. Case study 1. Sunita Devi, 25-year-old, is a case of domestic violence and abuse by her husband who worked as a wage labourer. He would often scold her when she would ask for money. She sustained herself and her family by saving 20 rupees from the everyday household expenses. He left her at her Pihar, which is the natal home, for 6 months or so. She has 5 sisters at her Pihar, so it was a difficult situation as far as sustenance was concerned. Though she has studied till class 7th only, yet her story is remarkable. She started earning by opening a small shop on her own and gradually with her husband, and also started a mobile repairing shop gradually. She has travelled extensively, ranging from Dausa, which is 100 kilometers away from her village, Bhilwara, which is 400 kilometers away from her place, Barmaid, which is about 700 kilometers away, and New Delhi. When asked about her travel experiences, she opined that दिल्ली के अंदर बाहर के लोग कमा के खा रहे हैं, आगे बढ़ने को अग्रसर हैं. I translate, in Delhi, people from outside are settled and earning. They're ready to move forward. After she started traveling, she feels that due to exposure, she's not now scared of speaking publicly. She told me that she collected around 60 to 70 women and took that group to the local block development officer to address the issue of lack of water supply in her area. Now she is addressed as Madam by the villagers, who initially used to call her Ramesh ki Lugai, means the wife of Ramesh. She feels that she has her own identity because of her coming out of her household. She wants to construct a brick house instead of existing mud house. She says, in her words, कच्चा मकान है, आगे पक्का मकान बनवाने का सोचा है. अब घर में झगड़ा नहीं है, बदलाव आ गया है. I translate, mud house is there in future, want to construct a concrete house. There are no fights and arguments at home now. Change has arrived. I want to complete her story by sharing with all of you that the first unanticipated lines with which I began my talk was from her about how women are bound by 5 elements. In her words, that औरत 5 तत्वों से बंधी हुई है. And this was her original creation. Case study number 2. Seema is a 25-year-old woman who got married at the age of 16 years while still in the 10th class, along with her elder sister, who was then aged 18. Both sisters are married to brothers in the same household, and this is very common in Rajasthan villages. The importance lies in the fact that Seema did not allow her Gauna ritual. Gauna is a custom and ritual associated with the consummation of marriage to take the bride from the natal home to the groom's place. So the importance lies in the fact that Seema did not allow her Gauna ritual to take place and refused to go her in-laws' house, unlike her sister, as she wanted to get herself educated. She says she feels a difference in working inside the household and outside of it. She feels she can contribute far more substantially in the financial front when she began stepping out of her household. She says her involvement with the larger village community organizations has taken her to the different places. Again from 72 kilometers and then gradually to far off places. So for her first travel, it opened her horizons. She says, "पास तो देख लिया, अब हम दूर जाकर भी क्यों ना देख लें." That was her lines when she visited for the first time a nearby place and then gradually house it. I translate that. When I have seen nearby places, then why not places far off? She then traveled to Barmaid, which is in the western part of Rajasthan and which is about 700 kilometers away from her village. Her leap from 70 to 700 kilometers is an accomplishment in itself for an individual coming out of her household for the very first time. Reaching Barmaid, which is a desert area in western part, she feels the women there are in more backward condition than herself. For her, stepping out of her household and traveling has liberated her in many ways, and said, She is less fearful and less uncertain than now how she was before. She says she could relate to the barmaid women plight as she too had witnessed a similar kind of fate in life. She told me how in her time in barmaid she had gathered a few women there and helped them in opening their bank accounts. She says, it's a different world outside. I never thought I would get to visit a bank. They have a different system of operations that I did not understand. But the fear is over now. I can make my way out of most things now. The next case study is of Mamta, who's a 29-year-old widow. And I've deliberately chosen this case study because she comes from the most forward community of Rajasthan. She lost her husband to cancer 2 years after her marriage. She was only 16 years back then. She spoke to me about her upbringing as a girl child and said it is a disgrace for that community to have its women step out of the household, speak openly to people, or work outside of their household. Her vocabulary had a lot of the word chahiye, which showed a lot of these restrictions were mandatory and obligatory. She says, लड़कियों को बचपन से बताया जाता है कि उन्हें बाहर नहीं खेलना चाहिए, किसी से बोलना नहीं चाहिए, which means that girls are told since childhood that they should not play outside, they should not talk to others, she said. She did not want her children to feel the absence of their father and wanted to do all that she could do to bring them up in the best possible manner that was available to a woman of her means. She added that she did not want her in-laws to feel the absence of their son, and she said, मैं ही उनकी बेटी, मैं ही उनकी बहू, मैं ही उनका बेटा. Translation, I am their daughter, I am their daughter-in-law, I am their son. She began supporting her family after her husband's death by sewing clothes and selling them. Her family was initially upset when she took up what she did. But now, she says, they are proud of her courage. She says, पहले हमारे ससुर जी हमें भींदड़ी कहकर बुलाते थे. अब हमें हमारे नाम से पुकारते हैं. बहुत अच्छा लगता है अपना नाम सुन के. I translate. Initially, my father-in-law would address me as Bhindadi, the local term that means daughter-in-law. Now he addressed me by name. I feel happy hearing my own name. She says she has her own identity now. People in her neighborhood greet her, speak to her, and take her as an example. She says she has visited different places like Bara, Bundi, Tonk, Bharatpur, Udaipur, Alwar, and Barmer. She says the vulnerable women in backward areas reminded her of her initial days of helplessness. She feels the household is unsure about a woman's venture outside of it because it is used to seeing her inside the household. Once a woman breaks that bubble, life takes a different turn and changes. She says she has now the courage to pursue her education and is a class 10th pass with her son. She is now in class 12th with her son. She was speaking with pride when she mentioned she could afford to send her sons to an English medium school. She adds she never thought she could do this much. She says, बाहर जाने से ही सब कुछ मिलता है, घर बैठकर कुछ नहीं मिलता. Means, one can get everything by stepping out of home, cannot get anything just being confined home. The next case study is Shashi, a 30-year-old woman, hails from the tribal community, and she was married at the age of 12 years. Her husband has faced frequent unemployment. She earns a living for her household by sewing clothes and selling them. She shared that the thought of speaking on a microphone had frightened her and said her anxiety took the better of her that led her to forgetting all that she had meant to share. In her own words, मैं कपकपा जाती थी माइक पर कैसे बोलूंगी यह सोचकर. वो बताते मैं भूल जाती, वो बताते मैं भूल जाती. She spoke about her sense of self-worth and self-esteem increased as she traveled out of her village to different places like Udaipur, Kota, Chiprabarat, Bundi, Tong, and northeastern past, which ranges to about 600 kilometers away from her place. She says she had not visited the bank until recently and shared with me how she felt less frightened to speak to the bank staff, much unlike her, how earlier her self would have been fearful, hesitant, and apprehensive. Thanks to her travel, I saw Shashi awareness about various welfare and job-related schemes of the government. She was well informed. The next case is of Geeta, who is a 26-year-old, and she set the benchmark high for her fellow community female members by raising the issue of toilets at her village. All of them got toilet made for themselves at their houses respectively. When asked about travel outside her village, she promptly said that पहले जयपुर भी बहुत लंबा लगता था. जब वहां गए तब हमने देखा और सोचा अब हम ऐसी ऐसी घूमने वाली कुर्सियों पर बैठेंगे, कैंटीन होगी, खाने की सुविधा होगी, बाहर रहने से एक दूसरे की बोलचाल, पहनने ओढ़ने में सब कुछ बदलाव आ जाता है. I translate. Initially, Jaipur seemed far away. When we went there, I saw and I thought to myself that I will sit on a fancy revolving chairs. We'll eat from cafe. There are facilities of eateries outside and food. Traveling and staying outside leads to change in one's language, clothing, perception and perspective. Next case study, and I'll make it short. Kiran, who's a 35-year-old, and she hails from a marginalized section of the society. Her story is uninspiring because her struggle is right from her childhood. She was very young when her father, who was in government service, lost his health and developed mental illness. Such was a difficult situation when growing up. She got respite in educating herself and did continuous studying. This helped her, and she moved from Bharatpur area to the Jaipur for further study. At her hometown, she did not know anything about the competitive exams or anything. After coming to the state capital, that is Jaipur, and getting herself educated there, she qualified the Rajasthan State Administrative Service exam, and she is currently executive magistrate, posted for the last 7 years. She has a 6-year-old son, and she is managing her household and job. In fact, she told me she has got an award recently for her professional achievement in handling law and order situations some time back. Last but not the least, she said that she is the first woman in Rajasthan from that section of the society to be into this service. Otherwise, she said, हमारे लोगों में ज़्यादा पढ़ाते नहीं थे और ना ही काम या नौकरी करने देते थे. I translate. In our community, the girls are not given more education and not permitted to go out for working or job. I conclude that this paper aims to bring forth and create awareness about the travels of present-day rural household Indian women and their stories and experiences. Findings of the study show that educational and economic needs appear to be the most important reason for women traveling. All of them I met were unanimous that after seeing them in their respective villages, people are now making their daughters educated and sending them for work gradually. Hence, their travels have led them to change their perspective and family opinions about them in a profound manner. Most of them are now involved in the decision-making processes of their families. These women are on 2 journeys, as the various scholars stated. They have been on physical journey by traveling across Rajasthan, and they have been on journeys that were internal, and that took place within their inner selves. Traveling out has introduced their mind to new possibilities. They accomplished those adequate things they otherwise would not have had. These women have come out of adverse situation, and they aspire to make their lives more responsible and influential. Therefore, in their limited ways, these women have been able to conquer the hindrances and obstacles they face. As a researcher, I strongly feel for other women too that they have to take lesson and identify changes in the societal structure that are in their own interest. They then can show the society at large that these changes are for their welfare. Thank you.
So now we can start the discussion. So the floor is open for question, observation, anything. So first we will take Lakshmi's paper, some questions, then gradually, as in order. So, any question on Lakshmi's paper? Yes, please.
Good evening, all the speakers. Thank you for 3 very fascinating and diverse papers. My question to Lakshmi ma'am is that, ma'am, in your conclusion you also mentioned that on all the 3 travel accounts or fictional accounts you have dealt in the presentation, spirituality was one of the common theme which ran across all the 3 papers. What I find very fascinating is, and I want to question is, that in all the 3 travel accounts, the spirituality the travelers found in a religion of Hinduism. That's not in Buddhism. And considering Japan is dominantly Buddhist state, I find this very fascinating and very unique. That's my observation through your presentation. So what's your take on that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I did say religion and spirituality are very integral to, especially the two works of fiction. In the first work, which was by Mishima Yukio, he does talk about Banaras. He talks about Calcutta, and of course there are many images from Hinduism. But the concepts that he writes about eventually, sitting in India after going to Ajanta and Ellora, are Buddhist concepts. So one can't really say that, they were only talking about Hinduism. There was Buddhism as well in the first one. Like he talks about what is known as a storehouse consciousness in Buddhism, Alaya, Vijnana and all that. For the second author, again fiction, Fukaikawa, he like I said, there is no clear definition of what really did he finally find in India. Was it Hinduism or was it... But the one thing which I mentioned during my talk was that through not just the last work, which happens to be the one I talked about, but through many of his works, he has tried to understand how Christianity is in Japan or how appropriate it is in Japan. And then the fact that he comes to India, and incidentally it happens to be his last work, where he chooses to take all the characters away from the Buddhist sites to Banaras. So one can say Hinduism may have played a role in the final understanding, because he takes up Ganges and then how it is like all-encompassing and it takes in everybody. But without really saying that he is actually adopting the religion or something. So there is a strong influence. And the third one, religion is mentioned about amongst the many other things that the travel writer Hotta Yoshie talks about. So there is no one strong message that's going across. So, but yes, spirituality does come in one form or the other.
Any more? Or how do you pronounce her name? Ajie. Okay. Thank you very much, Ajie.
She is Lakshmi.
Sorry,
we are taking Lakshmi's paper now. Anyway.
I thought, no, I mean...
One by one.
Yeah, it's just let it be, when the questions are, they will think about it, they'll speak, yeah. Dalrymple, I was a little uncomfortable with treating him as a travel writer, because there is a large body of work that he has produced as a historian and White Mughals and so on. And a traveler would be somebody who's not aware of the archives, would be randomly observing, rituals, etc. That's what we've seen being discussed since yesterday. But here is a person who's training himself in the archives as well. And so I do have a little bit of discomfort with that. And also you use the words like his writings being journalistic and new imperialistic and so on. But that is not the case in White Mughals. That is not the case in City of DJ Inns. And so there's so many other kind of works that come up. I wouldn't put him there. And caste, the cases you were quoting about caste and, his observance of, how people are. You quoted one very important case where the caste members will not come out, and he was surprised with that. The caste members are not protesting, the fellow people are killed and so on. I think that is a very normal observation, even for a city dweller like me. It would not. I wouldn't go far as new imperial or journalistic, and also I think somewhere we need to distinguish between post-coloniality, post-colonial writings. These are really beyond that. Post-colonial, I do not know if that can be put in that category. Also, there's a process of decolonization, which is a very recognized field of study. I think that probably you could bring in those, terms, and I was very interested in, how you deconstruct his writings through only one book. So that's my question to you. Can I ask second question to, if it is okay with you, then I won't have to speak again. Yeah. So yeah. Is that okay?
Lakshmi?
Yeah, no, to Shwetanshu. Yeah. Shwetanshu, thank you for your paper. I think slightly a similar thing about travel versus immigration. Travel, this is a travel which they're not doing it consciously. It is a forced travel, either to get water or move away from the situation, or travel for political purpose and so on. Traveler to us is somebody who has a power of narrative, who doesn't only talk about oneself. In your narrative, there was self. That is slightly, she doesn't have a perspective of the society, that these people do this. And also caste, I thought, was very important here. Maybe you can tell us about what caste these women are. Yeah, thank you. But I like the gender coming in. Thank you. Sorry for taking that from me.
Shall I go first? Yes. Okay. So, you asked me how I would classify him as a journalist. I agree with you that he has written histories and other kinds of books as well, but his first book was a book on his journey to China called In Xanadu. And the second one is To the Holy Mountain. Now, both of these are just travel works. And I don't think I should say just travel works. Actually, in all of his works, travel provides a window to history and vice versa. So you don't have any of his travel writing without references to history, and you don't have historical writings without reference to travel. Anyway, in one of his interviews, he has classified his writings into 3 groups, and he calls them travel writing, historical writing, and journalistic writing. And this book, The Age of Kali, falls into the category journalistic writing, and his other book, 9 Lives also, he classifies under that. Whether I could call it journalistic writing, definitely. I did not have enough time to dwell more on that in my paper. But he starts off with, and I think I gave a little bit of introduction to what is literary journalism. So that is very different from what you would term as journalism otherwise. So this means residing in a place for some time, interviewing the people, getting to know them personally, and then writing about them. So it's a term that I had taken from journalism, which is called saturation reporting. And it is, so in that way, this is journalistic. And regarding caste, yes, it is an observation that all of us would make. But he, as a traveler, I think, and maybe to a certain extent an outsider, would observe these things. And like I told you, because of the journalistic approach he's taking, his first entry into all of these stories is through newspaper reports. So when he sees a report in a newspaper, he immediately follows that lead, and that is why he occasioned upon these incidents of caste violence. And the very interesting question on post-colonial. What I said in my paper was that he's very aware of his position as a writer who is writing in the contemporary age, and he's very aware of post-colonial criticism and theory, and therefore his writing is very self-reflexive. He's constantly referring to that, constantly making sure that he is not towing the line of the imperial traveler. So if you would like to talk about it being post-colonial, then probably this would fall in that category.
Thanks, Jyoti, for asking this question. Probably I can then, share some of the things which. So, your first thing that when we see study about the travel writing in the 16th and the 17th century, mainly the travel was for the purpose of expedition, voyages, and mainly they were scientific explorers. When we, come to the 18th and 19th century, the travelers had their, their intentions was more of penning down their personal thoughts. It came to their own, sharing their own experience it became more subjective with the inclusion of personal thoughts and feelings of the writers, the travelers. So here, and then obviously fashioning selves is our theme here. When we study about this, I haven't gone into the debate of the fashioning selves and then the others, but then when a traveler is traveling to the different places, and she is, here in my case, it's she, the rural woman, she is not forced to travel. She is not forcefully being traveled. She is going for the livelihood. She is going for her economic upliftment of her own. And secondly, when it's not about that, she's not talking about the society. When I was talking about the case studies, I said that how the societal perception changed for them. They were, they started being called as madam in the village, and so the society within the family also they got the decision-making ability. I mean, their position changed totally within their own small space. And your third query was, I think, on the caste to which they belong to. I have, as I said, I have deliberately chosen the various, I did not mention, but they come from the Rajput community, they come from the Gurjar community, they come from the Meena community. So they come from the various sections of the society, right from the so-called upper, strata to the, I have tried covering all the sections of the society, the marginalized as well, and how the women were sharing their own experiences.
Any other question for Lakshmi's paper? I just want to ask Lakshmi, this, I have forgotten the name, but you refer one writer who writes about this animal sacrifice.
Yes.
Yes. I was wondering what was the, reception in Japan, being a Buddhist country there, violent.
So these three works I had chosen also because all three of them, if I first talk of the fiction, the two authors, Mishima Yukio and Endo Shusaku, are very mainstream Japanese literature writers. And the scene, which is how have they been received? They are very popular. Both books are read, and Mishima especially is a very, very popular author. And the scene, which I haven't read today, but which describes how, he sees, the character sees a corpse floating or a very gory detail, is possibly one of the things that at least my professor in Japan would say that this is a very good depiction of how India was perceived as. Relatively speaking, one can't say that the second book was not as popular, but in relative terms, possibly Mishima was the more well-known author compared to the second author, Endo Shusaku. And Endo Shusaku's other works were possibly more popular than his work on India. But since his work is something that takes so many of the images from Mishima and from the travel writing and professes as much that I went to India because I read this travel writing and I read Mishima. So I tried to combine the three and see how they have worked together. But the reception, if you're talking about Mishima Yukio of the book, it's a very well-known work, ma'am. So people know about this work and not necessarily feel that it's something bad or,
So again that exoticization.
Yes, yes,
as you say.
yes. But interestingly, Japan herself is talked about like that by some other authors, and she in turn tries to look at India and again looks, Orientalism again. So that's why it's a very interesting place where Japan is, how she looks at India.
Any other question on Ajie's paper?
The Dalrymple's Age of Kali, were the individual chapters actually published as individual pieces? Is that, did they come out individually beforehand? And then
I'm not aware of that.
I'm wondering because I think, maybe that's why he classes it as journalism. I think maybe, and I'm not sure, but maybe they were gathered together after they had been published separately.
Okay.
But I might be wrong, but I have
maybe some of them. I don't think all of them because
Right.
it's really vast.
Yeah, okay. But that might be part of the answer.
Yes.
And yes, he did begin his career as a travel writer, and then he became other things. So that's the trajectory of his career.
Should we move to Shwetanshu's paper? Should I take question? Any question on the last paper? Any observation? Yes, please.
Well, hello everybody. Listening to the foreign travelogues, it was quite observation of mine that the account was quite stagnant in say that it was quite based on the spiritual aspect of India. They were not talking about polity, economy or anything else. Whereas when we drifted from the foreign account to an Indian account, as Shwetanshu ma'am has mentioned about the Rajasthan women, so it shows a dynamism in Indian society, so that foreign accounts lack. So do you think this foreign accounts, and when we are drifting to this Indian accounts by the rural women, so what do you think the Oriental perspective, does it affect the foreign travelers in presenting an image of India? And whenever we study Indian, Indian account about India, it's very different. So what do you think? The Orientalist thought affect that travel account of a foreigner, but if we see that Indian account, it's quite dynamic about the Indian society, but whereas the Oriental view sees it's quite stagnant and backward. So that's that. Thank you.
So in my paper, if I could answer, I mean, for the Japanese writers who took it up, the purpose of travel, like I have tried to sum it up at the end of the paper, was very well defined for the characters in the novel. In Mishima Yukio's work, there is this person Honda, who is like the main character. So he gets it as a gift, and it is almost like somehow trying to get the main character to India. And if you read till the end, then it really goes well with the theme of transmigration and the main character trying to understand that. And that he comes to India and thinks about these concepts of transmigration and rebirth. Somehow, possibly Mishima is trying to justify it. So the agenda was possibly already, well defined. Even for the second author, the fact that 5 strangers, Japanese people, decide to come to India, but mostly with purposes well defined, and there's only one couple, a honeymoon couple, who want to go and see the very nice places, live in nice hotels, who are the ones who get disappointed because the tour ends up being mostly around Banaras and going to the Ganges, and they feel that they're really missing out on, they wish that how I wish we had gone to a better place, stayed in fancier hotels and done something more fun. So that is also written in the novel. So maybe because it's well defined, so yes, there is the Oriental perspective comes into place. And like I said, there is almost an absence of any dialogue with the locals. And wherever there is, after the dialogue, the author says that, that people are talkative and they try to they give you a sermon about Indian politics and how Nehru was a great man and things like that. And even in the last travelogue, in fact, the travel writer says that, how Indian people, even Nehru, he criticizes by saying that it's a beautiful work, Discovery of India, but somehow it is a very colonial perspective, and he says that I'm sure Indians can look at themselves outside of that. So yes, you're right in that the images repeat from 1958 to 1993 with some differences. So it is not so dynamic, and the part on Rajasthan, I think you can answer better. Yeah.
I would just like to add that what Professor Johan said in his keynote address, that when see from the external point of view, and somebody who belongs to this place obviously has a better way of reading the people, and then we need to take Indian route, internal route in fact, I think that's the main thing, that yes, more and more Indian scholars are needed to talk about the travelogue and about this way of Indian writing. Thank you. So there's a lot to explore in this paper.
Yes, please.
You said that Japan is also presenting the aspect of Orientalism, and then the characters, as they are there people, they are coming to India, and India is the land of Buddhism. Buddhism originated in India, and they are coming to Buddhist sites. So isn't it that on one hand Japan is presenting, or in these novels as it is there, they are talking about Orientalism, or that element comes up, and then on the other hand they are coming to India, which is the place of Buddhism. So how one can match these two things, where the superiority complex, so to say, is there, and then they are coming to India, and that is being seen as as an inferior.
So, so towards the end of the paper, this is what I realized, and I tried to put it in my conclusion, that Japan has a very interesting, a very ambivalent stance on looking at India. On one hand, she has been the subject of, or the object of, Orientalist perspective, how Japan is depicted perhaps in novels by Western writers. But at the same time, when Japan talks about India, a fellow Asian nation, she somehow, Japan portrays India using the very same images that might have been used by a Western author, or how a Westerner would look at India. So that's what I said. It's a very ambivalent stance, and so a very interesting one actually to explore. Around the 1980s is when Japanese people for the first time started reading Orientalism by Edward Said. So some of these works predate that. And like Mishima Yukio, but interestingly he uses that perspective. The second work is not just influenced possibly by Said, but also by Mishima Yukio. So I really don't know the connection if he directly, Mishima Yukio, read Edward Said's Orientalism. I'll really have to look into that. But that ambivalent stance is actually an interesting one, is what I could just discover. So I agree there that on one side, there are both sides to it.
Because in the context of China, there is a concept of a Sinocentrism. You see, the West or Western historians said that Chinese had this Sinocentric feeling, and they called others as barbarians, etc., etc. So, but the point is, it was deconstructed by a historian Tanchung, where he says it was not really the case, because when you take a look at in the literature, in the Chinese literature, there are episodes where they are praising other lands. And they in fact said that India is the country we should look to, because Buddhism originated in India. So India is in that sense superior to us. So you see, so therefore China is also is taking a position there, or so therefore they are saying that they are saying that India is is the land of Buddhism. So therefore they are better than us. So they hailed India as a country.
So in case of Japan, earlier Japan used to be known as what is in Japanese known as Tenjiku. Tenjiku means paradise. Slowly in the modern times, the word Indo came into being, which is India. So it's not like the land, they're looking down on India. So there are two aspects to it. One is they really look up to the philosophy, the religion, and things like that. In fact, they talk about it at length, both authors. But when it comes to the daily life, people, and the fact that there is filth in a place where they wouldn't expect it to be. So they are talking about that at length as well. So there is a mix of both. But the fact that they decided to get all their characters from Japan to India to talk about Buddhism, or to even go to the Hindu sites, means that surely it's not just looking down upon them about India at large, but they at the same time don't think it important enough to interact with the locals, or that aspect hasn't been covered at length. Yeah.
So I'm using the word look down upon, or inferiority, superiority, binary,
yeah.
in a loose sense.
Yeah.
Sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
It's a very small observation, but I think that someone mentioned the idea of stagnant India as something that's typical of the colonial period. I think it's useful to remember that it's also a pre-colonial image. It doesn't emerge only under the British rule. Already in the 17th and early 18th centuries, you find people who observe India from Europe not in a position of dominance, not as part of a colonial establishment, or maybe just as a commercial colonial, very small colonial position, or as visitors, like in the case of Bernier, who already developed the image of a stagnant India in connection to its government and its customs. There's even a treatise by a French officer in the very early 18th century he publishes in Europe, called The Comparison of the Customs of the Indians with the ancient Hebrews, the Jews, the ancient Jews, saying that what they have in common is that they never change. The question is where it comes from. And my answer is it doesn't come just simply from political domination or from a desire of political domination. It comes from something else. It comes from the sense that things in Europe are changing very fast. The sense that things in Europe are changing is what creates that image first, before it becomes part of a domination strategy. It's not something that is often said, so I think it would be useful to say.
We have to conclude the session also.
My question is to Shwetanshu ma'am. You discussed all these case studies. I want to know, and these women were from different communities. So what was the ease of movement of these women? Were the lower caste women, they got, when they moved out of the house, how much resistance did they face or they didn't face resistance at all than the upper caste women?
Oh, that's an interesting observation, yes. All of them have struggled in their own way. All of them faced those obstacles, right from the higher caste woman who was a widow, and she was just 16 when she lost her husband. So since then, and now she's 33 or 34. So it's only when she became financial, when she started giving money to her mother-in-law, she said, then she started getting, recognition. Yeah, and in one line she said, "Paise ke lalchi." You see, so this was, and again from the marginalized section also, this woman who was very vocal and very well informed, well read, and again she had her own problems when she faced a lot of fights and arguments, and her husband was unemployed. He was a wage laborer. So in almost, all of them had their struggles in every way, and then they.
Okay.
So that will be the last question.
Namaskar everyone. Ma'am, my question is to Shwetanshu ma'am. So as someone who is coming from Rajasthan, so the case studies that you have talked about, it's about the common women, rising to a position, which they have been living, before in a position where they felt like they were not empowered, but there have been certain circumstances that have happened in their life, and then they were bound to take those decisions, where, they have to, break the shackles from the patriarchal society that they were living in, and then to take decisions for themselves, for the family, and to, for their children, So these are the stories, that the common women are telling, which we do not get to hear, from, the case studies that you've talked about, it's about, the common women coming up, and talking to you and telling about, what, the problems that they had faced in life, and how they have overcome it. So it is very important, that something like this is being raised in conferences like that, so that we get to hear about, the ground root problems, that we have in societies. And so it was just a general observation that I felt, that you talked about in your paper.
Thank you. It's really important, somebody coming from Rajasthan. Thanks.
So I think we had a good part of discussion over all the papers. I thank all the paper readers, all of them. say something? Oh, sorry. So she will give the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Well, I just like to thank everybody for taking the trouble to come here and present very interesting papers. All we've thought of was in organizing this, the purpose was to address various issues of various aspects of travel writing with reference to India, and I think the papers have enabled us to do that, and they have been very interesting. Discussions have been very interesting. Thank you very much again.
I think we should thank you. And thank you so much for your organizing and bringing us early. It's obviously a huge task, and we've had a very enjoyable time. Thank you.
She's thankful to you people coming from outside, taking so much trouble and attending the conference.